Welcome back. Yesterday we learned all about browser forms, events, and event handlers. Our assignment was to improve upon our Battleship game by making a UI with HTML and handling player interactions using JavaScript. So let's go take a look. Okay, so I basically have the same code from our Battleship game that we made a few days ago. The only difference really in the JavaScript is this part right here. I just made a couple variables to get us started. They point to important parts of our HTML, which I'm going to run you through right now. And the only other thing that I did here was there were two variables up here, guesses and player1, and I just put them onto an object called data. I'll actually call it state. This is going to be the state of our game. I took all the CSS out except for this background color and this class d-none, which hides any element that has that class. I'm going to add Bootstrap CSS. It's a third-party library. We're going to learn about it today anyway, but I'm going to add their CSS to this page, and so I don't need to write more CSS. d-none is actually a class that Bootstrap uses, but if you're not using Bootstrap, you can copy it right here, and you'll see why it's important as we go. And so I'm just going to paste the link to the Bootstrap CSS file here, and then I'm just going to run the page so that you can see what happens simply just from adding that one script. So it styles a lot of the parts of our page. It makes it look nice without us having to really do much. And so we have this top part of the page, says ready to play Battleship, has some instructions. That can be found in our HTML right up here with the section ID instructions. We're going to hide this when somebody hits the Start New Game button. So the Start New Game button, that should have an ID of start. Instructions, an ID of instructions. If we scroll down both the HTML and this preview, we see this section with an ID of you win. We're going to show this to the player if they win. Likewise, the section with ID you lose will show this to the player when they lose. And then our game is this form down here. There's really not much to it. It's two select boxes with options to just select coordinates and a button to fire a missile at that coordinate. And then we have this little label for shots fired and remaining shots. This way the player can see how many shots they've taken and how many shots they have remaining before we, show them this so sad you lost message. So that's this section here. It's a form with the name chord form. These classes like p-4, that's just padding. It's something that Bootstrap gives us. They're all just utility classes. Same thing with lead and form group and form inline. They have nothing to do with our game. It's all about the styles from Bootstrap. So here's the shots fired and shots remaining spans. And then here is our coordinate X select box. Here are options. There are 8 options, A to H. Then we have coordinate Y, 8 options, 1 through 8. And then our submit button, which says fire missiles. And we don't need to give that an ID because it has a type equal to submit. Now to hide all these to begin with, we can just add a class to each of these sections with that d-none. So I will just copy this. We'll put one on you lose, you win. And so when we run the page again, we should only see the instructions. It says ready to play Battleship, and it has a quote from the movie Battleship. So let's head over to the JavaScript file. Now at first, this can seem like a daunting task, right? We're going to make this game, There seems to be a lot of moving pieces, but in actuality, there's really not much that we need to do. We sort of need to build maybe 3, maybe 4 functions. Okay, so we're going to need a function to check, is game over? And all that's going to do is just tell us, has the player made too many guesses, or have they won? Because the game can end in 2 ways. Either the player wins, or they run out of guesses, in which case they lose. We're going to need a function to display the score. And that's just going to display shots fired, shots remaining. And we need a function to start the game. Actually, start or restart the game. And this will be triggered when someone hits the Start New Game button. So when they hit that, we want to call the start or restart game function. And basically, it's just going to reset our state. And our state should actually have some ships in it, an empty array for ships. I'll actually set these all to null. In this restart game, we're going to set the initial state or reset it. We're going to hide and show the appropriate parts of the screen, and then the player will be all set to start taking shots. So the first thing I guess we would have to do is update the state. So state guesses equals 3. State player 1 equals false. That's 1 as in has the player won the game, not as in, ready player 1. And then the ships. And so state.ships will equal this array. And so we need to put a few ships into the array. If you remember, we had originally, down here at the bottom of the page, we created some ships and then we stored them into this array here. We did this with static values. So if we use these same values over and over, our game's not going to be too interesting because the ships will always be in the same place. So we're going to write a loop, and the loop is going to fill our state.ships array with 3 ships that have random coordinates. And so the way we do this is we just make a chords array. And so you can see this array has 8 letters in it. We're going to need to grab 2 random numbers. And we also need a ship count. So we want to get 3 ships, right? So while ship count is greater than 0, and that's what this means right here. We're just saying every time we do this loop, we're going to decrement ship count by 1, and when this equals 0, the loop will be done. So this will loop 3 times. And every time we're going to get a random x. We'll base this off of the length of this coordinates array so that if we ever want to add or remove coordinates, we won't have to update the code here. Get the floor of this random number because we need numbers 0 through 7 to pick one of these 8 values, A through H. So we need a random y. And for that, we can do the same thing we did here. The only difference is our random y, we will be incrementing by 1. So we'll make a ship like this. Paste that there. So we make the ship by calling Battleship Factory and passing in our random x value from the chords array and our random y value plus 1, because this gives us a random number from 0 to 7. We want a random number from 1 to 8. So that's why we add the 1 here. And then we want to push this onto our state.ships array. So this should give us our 3 ships. And now our state is pretty much all set up. We can delete that. If we wanted to, we can console log the state here. We will call display score. And so display score is actually going to handle more than just showing the score to us. Anytime we're displaying the score, we know that we are in the game. And because of that, we could actually make sure to remove the class dNone from our game section. Add the class dNone to the instructions section. And so this will happen anytime somebody fires a shot. jQuery will make sure that we don't just have a bunch of dNones, and if our game section doesn't have the class dNone, jQuery won't remove it. So even though this will get called multiple times throughout the game, we don't really have to worry about checking anything. If we weren't using jQuery, it would be a lot more code than this. So now, to display the score, we need to see how many guesses the user has left. And in shots remaining, we can set the HTML there to just be state.guesses. So that's how many guesses they have remaining. So it will be 3 to begin with. Shots taken will just be 3 minus amount of guesses that they have already made. So shots fired display will have the HTML that's essentially just the inverse of shots remaining compared to our guesses. At the top of this function, we can actually hide the player lost and the player won part as well. And then at the bottom, so after we show the shots, we can unhide one of these sections if the game is over. So if state.player1, then we will end up showing player wins. So we can remove class dNone from that. Else, if state.guesses is equal to 0, then likewise we will show a endgame situation, except it will be the player lost section. So only if the game is over will these happen. And this is on the display score. We will call this function anytime we start or restart the game, and we're also going to be calling this function anytime the user takes a guess. So is game over? We can just return state.guesses is less than 1, or state.player1 is true. So if this is true, or if this is true, then the game is over. And we will use that inside of our function to fire missiles. And this will be an event. It will come from the form. We will prevent default because we don't want it to submit to the browser. And here we're going to check, is game over? And if the game is over, we don't want to do anything. We might just want to make sure display score ran. And underneath here, we will get the values from our form. But before we do that, why don't we just run this and make sure it's actually working? So here in our console, we can see that the state is at its base state. If we hit start new game, so we need to make an event for that. So we do have the start button. So our start button on click, we are going to call the restart game function. Then we need another event, which is going to be for our form. And when our form is submitted, we're going to call the fire missiles function. So let's run this again. And now when we hit start new game, the form shows up at the bottom and we see the state gets logged out. It shows us our 3 random ships. The player 1 equals false, guesses equals 3. And so now the player is ready to make some guesses and then fire the missiles. And we will handle that right down here. And the way that we will do that is we need to get the 2 select elements from our form. So in the form, we will find the select with name equals chord X. And then we need to find the one with name equal to chord Y. So if you remember, our battleship factory function gives us a battleship that has the method for guess position. That takes an X and a Y. But we also had this intermediate function, does guess hit any ships, and this returned true or false if a ship was hit. And this took ships, which really it doesn't have to. We can just make ships be ships array from our state. So it takes a guess, and the guess has an X and a Y property. And that is passed to the ship.guessPosition, and then it returns either true if any of the ships are hit, false if this whole loop goes through and none of them are hit. And this also decremented guesses. We're going to do that on our own. This is sort of important. Our guess.y, we either have to make it a number here or up here in our form we'll make sure it's a number, because the numbers that we're going to get from these options will be strings when we get the value of them. And we get those values very simply. We can put a plus in front of this to make sure it's a number. It just casts it to a number. So y, we need to find a selected option. So it could either be option selected or just use this selected pseudo selector and then get the value of that. And so we do the same for x. X doesn't have to be cast as a number because it's a letter, so a string is fine. And the reason that might trip you up is because in this guess position function, if the y is a number, which it will be here, but our guess.y, so if either one of these is a string and the other is a number, then it's never going to return hit. So we pass our guess into does guess hit any ships. And when we do that, we also need to decrement the state.guesses number. And if it was a hit, then we want to set state player 1 equal to true, because the player, they won. And after that, we can call the display score function. And maybe in the display score function, we could also, if either one of these is true, so if game is over, you know what, we'll put this down in our form. So if the game is over, let's disable our submit button. So form find button of type equals submit. and just set attribute display disabled equal to true. So then the form cannot be used anymore. And if we are going to do this when the game is over, in our start restart game, we need to make sure to set disabled to false. All right, so let's see if this works. Let's run it first. So here's our basic screen. We hit start new game. The form is shown. And so we make all those wrong guesses. Our shots fired is up to 3. Our remaining shots is down to 0. Our submit button is disabled. And we get this "so sad you lost" message. Hit start game up top to play again. We hit start game. Everything restarts. This time, why don't we go into the console and cheat. We'll look at the state. So we can see that there's a ship at coordinate C, 5. And so that should have made us win the game, and it didn't. So if I had to guess, I would say it's because we're using coordinate X as both X and Y. So this should probably fix it. Let's try it, let's run it. Start a new game, go to the console, cheat, E2. So let's put in coordinate E2, and we see that we win. It says, yeah, you rock, well done. We sunk their battleship. And then we can hit start new game to play again.